All of our titles at that game company definitely have a common DNA through them. What I see is really an emphasis on visceral or immersive experience of video game spaces, really emphasizing the environment and the audio. There's no death, there's no time limit, and there's no heads-up display. All that information we really try and embed into the experience itself to hopefully make games that are very intuitive.
Game development is not just about writing code or making models. You need to observe the world to figure out what people really need and make them. And when they see it, they're like, oh, I've been waiting this for a long time. But if you ask them, they wouldn't be able to describe what they want.
There's a huge difference in working with an internal team and an external team. And typically, the teams that we work with as far as external teams are long-standing teams with lots of history around them. But in the case of that game company, they were one of our incubation teams. So they're actually vastly different than working even with any of our other external teams.
We're making entertainment. And entertainment essentially is emotional supplements for people. If you want to create a success, or which in my opinion is you want to create the biggest contribution to the world, you better figure out what the world needs most and you build it.
We try and pick themes and emotions that we think anyone could relate to. Each time we've really challenged ourselves to do something different or explore a kind of gameplay that we haven't seen before, that we haven't made before.
Genova and I met in school at USC a number of years ago, and I did flow for him as it was his master's thesis. You know, he was exploring this notion of flow theory in games, and sure enough, you know, the thing took off like wildfire, and that's what led to Sony making the deal with that game company and leading us to do Flow again as a PS3 title.
When we made Flower, it's already super hard to describe. We say this is an interactive poem exploring the urban bustle and the natural serenity. But when it comes to Journey, it's a metaphor trying to explore our life's transformation and the crossing, the intersecting of our lives between each other. That's when we start to realize game innovation can actually be about emotion rather than just game mechanics or game simulation technology innovation. You can innovate on what game makes you feel. And that's pretty much kind of started our company, which is we want to make a game that makes you feel differently.
For me, the most important thing about that game company is their complete willingness to turn their backs on the traditional way of how to look at the world.
To me, the most important thing is that a game resonate with someone, that it be meaningful. What I always look for in an experience is, did it move me? Did it make me feel something new and interesting?
At that game company, because we've really found that we enjoy the pace of a small team sort of working tightly together, a lot of the decision-making process we go through on a project is about understanding what we can do to still leverage our limited resources but create a really polished experience.
It's definitely collaboration all the time, and that's really great because We all wear a lot of hats around here, and that's really fun.
That is why TGC as a company is so strong. It is the individuals who make up that company. It's their philosophy. Everyone who tries their experience is never going to look at games the same way again.
It could be believable that, you know, one day Jenova woke up with the idea in his head and then we just made it. But that's not how it works.
For Journey as a game, it's a person's birth was very young and he doesn't know anything, and he starts to explore, and the childhood is very safe and everything is exciting. And then as he grew, he realized more and more about why he's here and his purpose.
You wake up in this desert environment and you see the mountain in front of you. That's the goal of the game, is to get to the mountaintop. But through the experience of Journey, you learn who you are and what's happened in this world and what your purpose is.
At the beginning of the project, I was the only artist on the team. And Jenova and I talked a lot about the story, the feelings of the game that we wanted to get. It was very free-form. There wasn't very many, constraints.
It's the blank canvas problem. When you start a painting, it's white paper and you don't know where to go, and you just grab a pen, throw it onto the paper, very much like the brainstorm.
When they first go off and try to figure out what they're going to do, they just have an emotional vibe that they want to work off of, and they have a general concept of the things that they want to try to get across to people. But they don't necessarily know what that is, and we're all kind of waiting on the outside, and as they slowly kind of form this idea, we get to figure out new ways to support them, which is, again, that's very different than working with an internal or an external team in most cases.
It was a very iterative process. We just tried out a whole lot of things. I drew zillions of pencil drawings before we even went to the computer. That's where, the idea of this mountain originated. Originally, it wasn't a mountain, it was a cliff, and there was a crack in the cliff. So when we were designing the look of the environment, I was looking at a lot of different architecture from the ancient world, Egyptian architecture, Islamic architecture. I looked at Mayan temples. I'm an architecture nerd, so for Journey I really wanted to design a canon of architecture. And I wanted to have these curved, arches, but to do them in 3D it was too much, so we had to simplify the arches to be square shapes. And that kind of led me into looking at Navajo rugs and Native American symbology. Since they're made on a loom, curves are very difficult, so they have a lot of symbols that are very angular and iconic because of that. It took so long to just design that guy. I did hundreds of drawings for him, and it was difficult because we had just come off a flower, and the character is this gust of wind, That game company's never done a humanoid character. And so I had this kind of weight sitting on my shoulders. How do you do the first humanoid character for that game company? So for a long time, he was just an amorphous, pile of sand or something. The character came to me, through a ton of iteration, but the idea of cloth came, and we were like, he needs to be made out of cloth. So I started looking at kites, and so I looked at Japanese kite design, and that kind of gave me an idea for this very simple design based on those rug designs and those kind of patterns that I had actually been looking at for the architecture. The music of Journey is written by Austin Wintory, and he is my hero. He's a god. I love him. He's just super talented.
So then Jenova reached out to me right after Flower came out and said, I'd love to go to dinner and talk about our third game and see what you think. He was telling me all about his notions of the monomyth and Joseph Campbell and what all he was hoping to achieve with this game. He said, so what we would love to move forward is if you could write a central musical theme from which the rest of it will kind of be derived.
When we were still in the very start of the project, he sent us a test piece of music, and it was just so beautiful.
Jenova came in with Kelly and pitched the game to us. Team over at TGC had created a PowerPoint presentation. Halfway through, they start a trailer, and this trailer is really more of a teaser of moods and feelings and these landscapes. And there was a musical piece that I think everyone now has heard, created by Austin Wintory, the composer of the game.
We did a little mock-up trailer to greenlight the game with his music in it, and it gave it the mood, and I think that really was something that helped get the game off the ground.
It's one of the only times it ever happened to me that we had the meeting, and then I walked to my car, and in that space of 50 yards, it was there in my head. I mean, exactly. It was one of those rare instances where it's just like a lightning strike, where I got to my car, and so I left myself this voicemail. I was like, okay, solo cello, okay, and then maybe a harp should come in with bass flute, and it was crystal clear. So, it was down in Santa Monica, so I got a 30-mile drive or whatever back to the studio. So in that time, I called my cellist, Tina Guo, and I said, can you meet me at the studio in maybe 90 minutes? And called my bass flute player, Amy Tatum, and said, can you meet me at the studio in 90 minutes? Did a quick mock-up of the orchestra aspect of it. And they came in and we read it, and I sent it back, and that game company, in their typical way, was kind of like, okay, this will work. Let's get going.
In Journey, I think there is a bit more of a story than our previous games. We still want it to be a very accessible experience. We're not just talking about the controls and the technology, but also the content as well.
The hero's journey is a concept that I've been kind of ignoring for a long time. While I was studying at film school, this concept has already been introduced. Basically, Joseph Campbell is a comparative mythologist. He wrote a lot of religious and mythical story studies. And so he kind of basically created the overarching shared structure of these thousands of mythical and religious stories and call it the hero's journey. The hero, hero in today's words is someone saved the world, but really just the main character. Every hero at the beginning are living in their small safe haven, right? Their little home. But then very quickly there's a calling for adventure. But usually what happens is then the hero will have a resistance. He doesn't want to go, right? And usually it always comes from the natural force that the hero has to go on to adventures. And then once the hero starts to adventure, they leave their safe haven, they enter a magical kingdom. One thing about the hero's journey that is very interesting to me, the hero always brings something back to the home, something better to benefit this community. If a story ended, someone left the home and become super rich and lived somewhere on an island, it's usually not a story that will be told past for thousands of years. So when we approach Journey, sure, I can totally imagine having a motorbiker riding through the dunes. Instead, we picked a more I guess it's more like a romantic approach to create the feeling of sand. The whole team actually went to the Pismo beach. We kind of wanted to get inspiration of what sand is like. So we went there, we jumped through the dunes, we rode in there, we climbed it. So there's a memory in us about what does it feel like. I think we approach realism from an impressionistic style. We remember it feels like that, and we actually make it.
We took a trip to the Pismo Dunes. We all just got really sandy and, shoes full of sand, pockets full of sand, cameras full of sand. And that was really inspirational because, once you're out there and you see this vast set of dunes, you come back to the office with like a new kind of perspective. And I think that was really a pivotal moment in the project for me, just really getting out there and feeling what the game should look like, So that was cool.
Genova and I had lunch actually, and he showed me some of his early sketches for Journey. I just immediately knew that it was something that I had to work on. I had had a life-changing experience in Bhutan, where I trekked over a 16.5 peak, very high in the air. It had really caused me to have an epiphany about where my life was and what I was spending my time on and what I wanted to do. And as he was telling me about the concept of Journey and what it was supposed to represent, it just hit me right in the heart, and I knew that I had to go and work on it.
Along the way, you can encounter another robed figure like yourself, and that is another player somewhere in the world who's also on their own journey. There's no PlayStation Network ID, there's no in-game messaging system or chat system. It's really about having an experience in which you're in this strange world and you encounter a total stranger. This is our first online game, and so it was a totally new field for us. As we do with every single technical consideration at that game company, we really try and evaluate what are we going to be capable of with the people that we have here and the goals that we have with this project. One of the metaphors we use for Journey, especially in the online experience, is that it's kind of like hiking. As opposed to sort of walking around in your day-to-day life or like around a city, we often pass one another without really noticing. When we're hiking, there always seems to be this sort of acknowledgement to someone else that you meet along the trail. You're surrounded by nature and you're not really seeing anyone else, hopefully if it's a really good hike. But you also know that you're both kind of sharing the same experience, and that it's almost like a kind of secret that you have with one another, and that's a bond. And we took a lot of inspiration from that experience of hiking and in our consideration of the design of the online experience.
The hero's journey is actually the same as the 3-act structure, which is a very common narrative structure from Hollywood. Amazing that how the ancient, storyteller, the folk storyteller, the religious story writer all already know this interesting arc.
The story of Journey is still told without words because we wanted to leave it a bit open to interpretation so that you can draw your own inspiration from it or your own understanding of it based on where you're coming from.
Well, part of the reason our game doesn't have any language is because I'm not an English speaker. It's not my mother language. When I approach these games, I think a fundamental feeling does not require language. It's the only way I can make something that touches the American or Japanese audience is by creating something that's more universal emotion rather than a very sophisticated emotion. But because I'm trying to hit it from a universal level, it is a lot harder. Instead I actually just give up on language, which helps us to localize.
Every time you play the game, your character wakes up with a different symbol on him. And these symbols are throughout the world on tombstones and all sorts of different cloth. As this kind of language throughout the space. And designing that language was also tricky because we wanted them to all look like they're part of a set, but we wanted them to be unique.
Great.
Za kogo daješ?
Okay. Boban, we are connected? Yes. Okay, we are connected, we can go.
Saka Marko jednaš ili dva pati. Studio?
Austin Wintory, The Journey, Session 1. Let's go.
The recording in Macedonia was amazing. It was actually cooler than it was even supposed to be, and it's already cool. Remote recording is one of those very 21st century things. The fact that you can kind of record anywhere in the world from anywhere in the world now is without sacrificing quality or anything like that, is astounding. Originally, I was going to fly out there to conduct myself, but we were working on it right up to the point where I called him and said, I don't want to actually go out there anymore because I have full faith in Oleg Kontradenko, our conductor out there, and he absolutely delivered. He was phenomenal. I knew he was going to be great, so I said I would actually rather put my effort into getting the music as perfect as possible. Then when it came time to do the recording, I went down to the San Diego office and we set up a Pro Tools session running Source Connect so that we could monitor what they were sending. And then we set up Skype with their engineer so that we could be monitoring, okay, that was take 7, that was blah, blah, blah. But I really wanted that game company to be a part of it because we're recording an orchestra for their game and they've been hearing, crappy computer mock-ups for the last 2.5 years. I want them to really just get to relax and like look at all this talent that's all here for you. We set up a separate Skype with them so they would just periodically gather around and just sort of watch, and they just had it as like almost like background music at their office that day. But what was funnier is that Kelly was in Virginia, and then at GDC China, Robin and Genova were speaking, so trying to bring them into the mix as well. So they have, it was like the most 21st century session you could think of.
Very nice.
I also wanted to create the entire life cycle as you play through the game. And I start to kind of align the life cycle with the 3-act structure and with the hero's journey, and I realized it's almost perfectly aligned. But of course, on the road of the hero's journey, there's temptations, there's moments where you're lost. And then eventually, you grew up, right? You figure out where you're going, and through struggle, you overcome yourself and you reach the transcendence.
The last third of the game is my favorite. A lot of people will like, I think, the first half for its fun and its excitement. The last half of the game is very special to me because it makes me think about all the people that I have met in my life, how those people are important to me, and how I've gotten to where I am.
One of the things I love about That Game Company games is it allows you to project yourself into the game. The things that are going on in your life and the things that you feel, you can attach yourself to things and those experiences that happen in the game, and they help you resolve and look at those things in a different way. And that's really the special part about their game. So I think it's a very individual experience for everyone. And for me, it's very potent.
One of the premier tenets at TGC is to have a global impact, to reach a worldwide audience, and to transform the way that audience thinks of games.
The future of gaming will be even more diverse, and we're trying to make the things that's not in the market.
We're not talking about diversity of gender or race necessarily. I think what the important thing is diversity of thought.
When we began working with TGC, we already had the idea that we wanted to create a new and unique, innovative type of game for the PlayStation Network. We really had a strong desire to do things that other publishers wouldn't be willing to take on, and something that most of our consumers probably couldn't find anywhere else in the game industry.
When someone say, I'm kind of feeling sad today. I want to play something interesting, emotional. There's something out there for them.
Being here has really transformed my understanding of how games can touch people and change the way they feel about life and about their prospects in life. And if we're not doing that, then, you know, at least in some way with our industry, then I think we're not trying hard enough.
I've been thinking a lot about how to describe Journey. Ignore everything I've said. Just go there, be yourself, and walk through the journey yourself. The message gets through the best when you are experiencing it. And I hope that you can find something meaningful for you in the game.